Cool. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Classical Concerts from Quarantine, episode 8. Starting to feel like very much a fixture now. It's less of a bizarre thing to be doing on a Sunday, but more of something that I kind of anticipate subconsciously without even having to think too much about it. I hope you've all had a good week. I've had a much better week, I think, this week. The weather's probably helped. We've also had some lovely things going on around about our house and our neighbourhood. On Thursday we were invited to kind of lockdown cocktails in the evening in the streets with some of our neighbours. Quarantinis, I think they were branded. Well, I'm not sure my... Locktails or Quarantinis. I'm not sure my tin of Stella frankly qualifies as either of those. It's not quite classy enough, but it was really nice and amazing to think that it's taken such an extreme set of circumstances to meet the people who live a stone's throw around, and unsurprisingly some lovely people to meet as well, so I really look forward to that being a weekly tradition. Thank you so much to Anna for organising it. At home we've had the resumption of the hotly contested bake-off yesterday. In fact, I've just been taking a sugar hit from Tiago's almond pie, which I'm sure will carry me through today's musical offering. A pie baked with hate, for Tiago hates baking, but delivered with outstanding excellence. I suppose crowning glory of the bake-off yesterday was a deconstructed Colin the Caterpillar cake, accompanied by, well, it was a sort of a feast, an artistic feast that transcended mere baking and moved into the world of thespian word and dance, movement and music. Gabby really blew us all away with that, and I don't think anyone's going to be able to top that for bizarre factor, at least in the final. Today I've taken charge of the programme. We have a long list of requests, but I wanted to play these two pieces for you today, mainly because I feel like it's week 8 and we haven't had anything that calls itself a sonata yet, and a sonata is such a key cornerstone of all classical music repertoire. More on that in a bit. So yeah, we're going to have a Scarlatti Sonata and a Mozart Sonata. I'll talk to you a little bit about the contrast with those. As always, let's remember why we're doing this. If you are watching and enjoying this, you can very easily donate to our amazing NHS. There's a link on the Facebook and the YouTube descriptions. That almond pie is just sort of lodging in my throat a little bit. And there's also a link in my Instagram too. No, water's fine, no, thank you. Please give whatever you can comfortably afford to our incredible NHS if you can. And here's some lovely music. So I'm going to start, the Mozart is the main offering today. The Mozart is the meat, if you like, says a vegan. But the Scarlatti I thought would be a wonderful kind of scene setter and a little kind of glimpse behind the scenes of just how far the sonata evolved as a form over a very, very short period of time. And when Mozart composed his sonatas, the evolution was by no means at an end. Scarlatti was at it on a very interesting time period. So he was born in 1685, which just happened to be the same year as Handel and Bach, the two real heavyweights of the Baroque era. And then he died in 1757, 7 years after the death of Bach. And we sort of view Bach's death, because Bach was this unbelievable kind of father figure of classical music. We kind of view his death as the end of the Baroque era and the beginning of the classical era. So Scarlatti really interestingly spanned a little bit of both, well, the whole Baroque era and a little bit of the classical era. There are huge chunks of his life that we know nothing about. Real dearth of information over sort of periods where he seemed to have sort of gone off grid, off radar. But we do know that he composed a whopping 555 sonatas, the vast majority of which are for, I'm going to say keyboard, excuse me, that pie, because he was mainly writing for harpsichord at the time. The pianos were, even at the end of his life, in quite an early stage of development. So a huge wealth of writing for keyboard. Why I am drawn to his music, maybe more than some other composers of such an early time, is that I feel that even though he was writing for very early keyboards and harpsichords, the type of his writing suits the modern piano, I think, so unbelievably well. So the tones and the way he constructs his singing melodic lines, I mean, you'll see, I hope, in this piece, which I think is absolutely stunning, just how fitting, how much I think he would have approved of the kind of sounds we get out of the modern piano. So sonata, it was really just a word invented to differentiate from a cantata. Cantata was a piece that would have been sung, that would have been for voice. And so sonata is for a piece that's for an instrument. And that's really all there is to it. The earliest sonata we think of coming sort of in the late 16th century. And by this time, the evolution was in full swing. Now, in 100 years or so, there are going to be sonatas written that are nearly an hour in length. Scarlatti's are normally about 5 minutes in length. They also only have one movement. You'll see in the Mozart later, it's already broken down into 3 quite substantial movements. So these, although I have to say we do know that Scarlatti used to perform 2 or 3 of his sonatas back to back, as if to unify them as one work. So I think this was already something that was at play, even though it's not officially written into his pieces. The one I'm going to play you is from the middle period. We think, judging by the catalogue number, 208. Again, we don't have a lot of detail about exactly when it was written. What's interesting about his middle period is that he's starting to write many more slow sonatas. In his earlier period, they were almost all fast. In his later period, a bit like the Beethoven we talked about last week, his style becomes much more lean and condensed. In his middle period, he's writing much more slow works, which we'll talk about a bit more with reference to the Mozart later. So this is an incredible, for me it was also an incredible example, this work, of how much you can do with how little material. The left hand is unbelievably simple. It's really just marking time with a steady throb and some gentle harmony underneath the right hand. The right hand, because of this left hand structure, is given license to almost kind of improvise and freely meander and soar and sing and fly and weave around these left hand harmonies. And the way he does that is amazing. Very often, I mean, I think one of the most fundamental cores of classical music is of all music, is dissonance and consonance. And so the way that sometimes the right-hand melody fits completely in the left-hand harmony, and so makes us feel all warm and safe. And then every now and then he lands on a note in the right hand that grinds against the left-hand harmony and makes us feel all that tension, which of course gives us a massive kind of feeling of relief when he resolves it. Just incredible, the interplay. The form is very simple in these early sonatas. It's binary form, so that's 2 contrasting sections with similarity in the general use of material, and each section is repeated. That's all there is to it. Enjoy. Disarmingly simple. Just incredible kind of level of, on one level, purity, because the sound world is so kind of small and distilled and crystalline, but on the other level, quite sort of complex and advanced, because it has all these amazing dissonances operating. I'll never forget discovering that piece a long, long time ago, having not really heard any Scarlatti before, and just thinking, wow, incredible sound world from such an early period, an early stage in classical music development and in terms of writing for the keyboard, for the piano. Okay, so now we're going to fast forward. We don't know exactly when that was written, but we're going to fast forward only a few decades. We're going to 1784 now. We know exactly when this Mozart Sonata was written. And a lot's known about Mozart, obviously, his prodigious talent, his sort of slightly complex relationship, an unhealthy relationship with his father, his propensity to sort of fritter money away and live quite frivolously. What I like about this work is that it shows just what an intense, dramatically interested musician and composer he was, and also how quickly his musical style was advancing, with particular reference to, I think you can very much hear the foreshadow of Beethoven in this work very clearly. Let's not forget, it wasn't very usual at this time to compose pieces in minor keys. Mozart had written or was to write, but it was all kind of around this period. He had written a D minor concerto and he was to write a C minor concerto, but those were outliers. Those were the only two minor concertos in his 27 concerto output. And for some reason, which I haven't been able to totally put my finger on, but C minor, right from this kind of time, began to be associated with ideas of the epic and tragic nature. And its related major key, E flat major, in rather complementarily, began to be associated with ideas of heroism and nobility. We talked a little bit in previous weeks about synesthesia and the idea of associating specific keys with either colours or with specific moods. This is something that is fascinating to me. And if you look back at the output, more often than not, these huge, large-scale, epic, tragic works do find themselves to be in C minor. The other reason I thought it would be good to play this work today is because a couple of weeks ago I played you the Mozart Fantasy in C minor, and I think we were chatting about how it was very possible that he meant the C minor Fantasy to serve as a slow introduction to this sonata. He often played them separately, but did also perform them back to back, and their K numbers are, I think, sufficiently non-coincidentally connected, 457 and 475. As if to show a sort of unity between the two. The most overwhelming piece of evidence for this link comes in at the very end of this sonata, and it's not easy to spot. It took me a while to become aware of it. But he actually quotes the very beginning of the Fantasy at the very end of the sonata in an incredibly cool doffing of the cap to this enormous, if you play them both together, 40-minute arc that he's created across the two. The opening of the Fantasy, if you remember, started like that, and at the very end of the sonata, all hell's kicking off, and the hands are crossing, and it's a little bit of chaotic. But he starts quoting that tune up here, and then moves the right hand down here, and finishes quoting that tune in an absolutely majestic piece of writing. So now, as I mentioned, we're in 3 movements as opposed to the 1. And even at this time, I think... eventually all of the movements were to take on huge, enormous proportion. And this is happening a little bit at this time. But I feel that still at this time, it's the first movement that carries most of the weight. And the other 2 movements are served to balance and contrast and sort of... provide some symmetry for all that weight. although the last movement here, as we'll discuss, enters worlds of enormous intensity and darkness as well, as does the first. Some of the most interesting things about what he's doing here and the ways he's writing, unlike the Scarlatti where we had pretty much the same texture all the time, simple left hand and spinning right hand, here the texture is constantly being changed. Different ideas, different sounds are constantly being set against each other. In my mind, it's an idea that comes very clearly from opera. Mozart was this hugely successful and popular operatic composer, and so this idea of creating a melodic or harmonic idea, a musical idea, and having that as a character, and then setting that against a very contrasting idea, and then pitching a whole piece, watching those two ideas butt heads, is an incredibly effective way of generating drama. So for example, he opens with this very simple but very arresting motif, and then doesn't continue it, immediately offsets it with, and leaves us completely in suspense, and then goes back to the opening motif. And so right from the beginning we've got this incredible contrast of character and intensity. Keeping on the opera idea, when he's not pitting these kind of more large-scale orchestral feeling motifs against each other, we do have just good old-fashioned song coming in here. So after this dramatic first section, he brings in a soprano solo, and we have this wonderful lyrical singing writing that we so clearly associate with Mozart. And then the final cherry on the cake, if you like, of this kind of orchestral writing is when he sets up a dialogue between a feminine character and a masculine character just after the bit I've just played. And he kind of ticks two boxes in one with this, because he also gets to show off what was quite a new way of writing at the time, which was of one hand crossing the other and playing a tune at the top of the piano and then echoing or responding to it with a tune at the bottom of the piano, while the other hand plays the accompaniment in the middle. So we get this female voice, and then the male voice, and they have a lovely, really charming conversation. And it's for me, it's the stormy minor intensity of this work set against the kind of lyrical, charming, cozy, conversational writing that I've just displayed that really I find so arresting and so gripping. The second movement is one of his most beautiful things, I think. Friends of mine will oft have heard me break it out of an evening. It's got none of the storm and trouble of the first movement. It just sits in the relative major in E flat major. He spins this unbelievable melody. And those of you that know the Pathetique Sonata of Beethoven and the unbelievable famous slow movement of that will hear the start of that tune in the slow movement here. Another real link between the two works, and evidence for me that Beethoven was clearly heavily influenced by this when he wrote his Pathetique Sonata. The last movement comes back to a lot of the intensity and storminess of the opening movement, but it's done via shock tactics, not via sustained levels of intensity. So at the beginning, for example, the music is much more uncertain than it is overtly troubled. And then every now and then, this kind of horror erupts and bursts forth. He sets up something very cool at the beginning with the way that the two hands relate to one another. So we're in 3 time here, which means there's 3 counts each kind of bar. And the first count is always the strongest, normally in music. So you'd be going 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So the left hand is playing by those rules, going 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. But the right hand's going 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and making the third beat always the most important and most leaned on in the bar. And so when you put those together, feels very disorientating, because the right hand's telling us that we should be feeling a certain thing time-wise, and the left hand's telling us something completely different. The other thing I really want to touch on with this last movement, and again this relates it very directly to the Scarlatti, is how with the Scarlatti, and not just in that work, in lots of his sonatas, you feel like the music is moving very comfortably in time and space. There's not a whole lot of tension being set up temporally. We have a fairly uncomplicated, easy flow to the music. What Mozart is doing here, and again, one of the things that I find most arresting about any music that does this, is he's playing amazing games with time and space. There's a struggle going on. The music is not always aligned with the passing of time. Sometimes it feels as if time has stood still. Sometimes it feels as if he's pulling against the time that he'd previously set up. And this last movement is absolutely full of these silences where the music is ripped off and we just don't know where we are. There's no undercurrent of a heartbeat, of a pulse or anything. And then it abruptly starts again. And this is most prevalent just towards the end of the last movement, where he even writes a piacere above the writing, as you please, which basically is an invitation to take as many risks temporally as one feels one can get away with, and hopefully make you feel as uncomfortable as possible. One might expect in a piece so dark and in the minor that towards the end of the last movement we would, in a feeling of transubstantiation, move into the major and end with a feeling of reconciliation and comfort. This doesn't really seem to be remotely on the cards here. He does once in the last movement give us a little taste of that lyrical, major, operatic vocal quality that we had in the first movement, but it is only once, and the end leaves us in no doubt as to the dark, intense, passionate world that we've just left. Enjoy. Great. Hope you enjoyed that. Nothing like a bit of storm and stress to spice up a Sunday afternoon. I want to give a quick shout out to my friends at the Grunsborough Symphony Orchestra. They are doing very cool things in the lockdown. They've put together a kind of lockdown concert where all their different members have recorded things remotely and then put them all together at the same time. If you look on my descriptions on Facebook and YouTube, you can find their website where you can watch their concert, listen to their concert, and also be involved in future ones if you like. With regards to me, you can buy my DVD. The link is on the Facebook and YouTube links. Apart from that, stay safe. I think we're having a speech tonight from someone important, so we can see what they announce. But have a lovely week, and I'll see you again next Sunday. Cheers.